Remember when you thought the most painful tax day was April 15th? Plot twist. You're actually paying taxes every single day without realizing it. While we're all arguing about income tax brackets, tariffs have been sneaking into your shopping cart and stealing your money with the stealth of a ninja accountant. The average American family is losing up to $2,000 annually to these hidden taxes. That's like someone stealing your morning coffee every day for 3 years. Today, we're exposing this financial pickpocketing operation and showing exactly how much these invisible taxes are costing you on everything from your new fridge to that avocado toast you're probably eating while watching this. The ghost of tariffs past, America's forgotten tax history. Did you know that before income tax existed, tariffs funded nearly the entire U.S. government? That's right. While today's headlines treat tariffs as some novel economic weapon, they're actually America's original tax system. Let's travel back to the founding of our nation to uncover this forgotten financial history. When George Washington took office in 1789, the new federal government had a big problem: how to fund itself. The solution? Slap taxes on imported goods. The Tariff Act of 1789 was actually the second bill Washington ever signed into law, right after establishing the oath of office. Talk about priorities. For the next 124 years, tariffs weren't just part of America's revenue stream. They were the main event. From 1789 until 1913, these import taxes generated up to 90% of all federal revenue. Your great-great-grandparents weren't filing 1040 forms each April. Instead, they paid their taxes every time they purchased imported goods like sugar, textiles, or manufactured products. This system wasn't just about raising money, either. Early American leaders like Alexander Hamilton viewed tariffs as essential tools for protecting infant American industries. Hamilton's Report on Manufactures in 1791 laid out a vision of America shielded from foreign competition by strategic tariff walls. The goal? Help domestic manufacturers grow without being crushed by established European competitors. The 19th century saw wild swings in tariff rates as different political factions gained power. Northern manufacturing states generally pushed for higher tariffs to protect their factories, while agricultural southern states typically favored lower rates to keep their import costs down and maintain good trading relationships with their cotton customers in Europe. This regional tension over tariff policy was so intense that it even contributed to the conditions leading to the Civil War. By the late 1800s, average tariff rates had climbed to nearly 50% on dutiable imports. Imagine paying an extra half of the price on anything imported. The 1897 Dingley tariff pushed rates even higher, averaging 57% on dutiable goods, the highest peacetime rates in American history. Back then, walking into a store meant potentially paying double for foreign products compared to domestic ones. But here's where the story takes a dramatic turn. In 1913, the 16th Amendment to the Constitution allowed for a federal income tax, and the Revenue Act of 1913 made it official. Suddenly, the government had a new, direct way to collect revenue from citizens. The timing was perfect, just before World War I created massive new funding needs for the government. As income tax revenue grew, tariffs quickly faded from their starring role in American finance. By the 1930s, income taxes had surpassed tariffs as the government's primary revenue source. And by the 1950s, tariff revenue represented less than 1% of federal intake, a stunning reversal from when they funded almost the entire government. The shift away from tariffs reflected more than just a change in tax policy. It represented America's evolving place in the global economy. After World War II, the U.S. led efforts to reduce trade barriers worldwide through agreements like GATT, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and later the WTO, World Trade Organization. Average tariff rates plummeted from around 20% in the 1930s to less than 5% by the 1990s. But if you look at a 200-year timeline of American tariff rates, you'll see something fascinating. It resembles a mountain range, with dramatic peaks and valleys. The highest peaks came during the early Republic, the Civil War, the late 1800s protectionist era, and again during the Great Depression. Each of these spikes corresponded with specific economic and political circumstances, from funding the new government to protecting industries during economic downturns. What's particularly interesting is that the 2018 to 2024 period now represents the most significant upward spike in tariff rates since the 1940s. After decades of declining trade barriers, we're witnessing a dramatic reversal of that trend. Average tariff rates have more than doubled from their 2016 levels, increasing from about 1.5% to over 3.5% across all imports. That might not sound huge, but it represents billions in additional costs across the economy. This historical perspective helps us understand why economists react so strongly to modern tariff increases. They've seen this movie before. The 1920s and early 1930s offer a particularly relevant comparison. Following World War I, America embraced protectionist policies, raising tariffs significantly under the Fordney-McCumber Tariff of 1922. This protectionist stance seemed to coincide with the Roaring Twenties prosperity, creating the impression that high tariffs helped the economy. But when the stock market crashed in 1929, Congress doubled down on protectionism with even higher tariffs. What followed wasn't economic recovery, but deeper depression. While tariffs weren't the only cause of the Great Depression, they certainly didn't help matters. The parallel to today, raising tariffs during periods of inflation and economic uncertainty, has many economists nervously checking their history books. So what does all this historical context mean for your wallet today? While tariffs once funded government operations, they now function primarily as a hidden consumer tax. Current estimates from the Peterson Institute for International Economics suggest that tariffs now cost the average American household between $1,200 and $2,000 annually. That's not a small amount. It's roughly what the average family spends on clothing in an entire year. This cost doesn't show up as a line item on your receipt. It's baked into the prices of goods you buy every day, from avocados to appliances. And unlike income taxes, which are generally progressive, higher earners pay higher rates. Tariffs hit everyone who buys affected products, regardless of income level. In fact, they often hit lower-income households hardest, as we'll explore later. The stealthy nature of tariff costs is what makes them politically attractive. When your income tax goes up, you notice immediately. When tariffs increase, you might just think inflation is to blame for higher prices. This opacity is one reason why tariffs have remained a popular policy tool even as economists widely criticize their economic impacts. Smoot-Hawley, the tariff that crashed an economy. That invisible tax burden hiding in your shopping cart? It's nothing compared to what Americans faced in 1930. When Congress signed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act as the economy was already reeling from the 1929 market crash, they unknowingly lit the fuse on an economic powder keg. What was intended as protection for American industries transformed into one of history's most expensive economic lessons. One we're dangerously close to repeating today. Imagine walking into a store and finding prices had suddenly jumped 45 to 50% on over 20,000 different products overnight. That's exactly what happened when President Hoover signed this notorious tariff bill into law on June 17, 1930. The economy was already struggling, but rather than helping, these massive tax increases on imported goods poured gasoline on an economic fire that was just beginning to burn. The most shocking part? Economists of the time knew this was a terrible idea. They warned Congress repeatedly that such dramatic tariff increases would backfire spectacularly. Over 1,000 economists signed a petition begging President Hoover not to sign the bill. But political pressure won out over economic common sense, and the results were catastrophic. Other countries didn't just sit back and accept these new American tariffs. They hit back hard. Canada and Mexico led the charge, quickly imposing their own retaliatory tariffs against American goods. Before long, a full-blown international trade war was underway, with American products facing steep new taxes in markets around the world. The numbers tell the devastating story. Following Smoot-Hawley, U.S. imports didn't just dip, they collapsed by 66%. American exports suffered an equally brutal fate, plummeting by 61%. International trade didn't just slow down, it ground to a near halt. The world's economic gears, already struggling after the market crash, now seized up completely. But the real human cost came in American jobs. Before Smoot-Hawley, unemployment stood at around 8%, already concerning, but nothing compared to what followed. Within just 3 years, unemployment skyrocketed to a staggering 25%. Think about that. 1 in 4 Americans suddenly without work. Families lost homes, farms, and livelihoods as the economic damage spread through every sector. What makes this historical lesson so relevant today is the eerie parallels to our current situation. Just like in 1930, we're facing economic uncertainty with rising inflation and interest rates putting pressure on consumers. And just like then, we're seeing significant increases in tariffs that economists warn could trigger a dangerous chain reaction. To be fair, today's tariffs haven't yet reached Smoot-Hawley's extreme levels, but they're following the same troubling pattern: escalation followed by retaliation, creating a cycle that's difficult to break. We've already seen how other countries respond when the U.S. raises tariffs. They target American exports, hurting U.S. businesses and workers. This isn't just academic history, it's a warning sign. When the world's economic powers start trading tariff blows, average citizens always end up paying the price. As Gary Richardson, an economics professor who studied this period extensively, points out, the Depression started when tariffs were low. So the tariffs or the thought of having tariffs were not a cause of the Great Depression. But what his research clearly shows is that while tariffs didn't start the economic crisis, they dramatically worsened and extended it. The most frightening aspect of Smoot-Hawley wasn't just the immediate economic damage. It was how it poisoned international economic cooperation for years. Countries became increasingly isolationist and protectionist, making recovery from the Depression much slower and more painful than it needed to be. Today's global economy is even more interconnected than in 1930. Supply chains cross multiple borders before products reach store shelves. A car assembled in Michigan might contain parts from a dozen different countries. This integration makes modern economies even more vulnerable to trade disruptions than they were in the 1930s. What would a modern Smoot-Hawley scenario look like? Imagine unemployment doubling or tripling from current levels. Picture entire industries collapsing as export markets suddenly close. Consider how quickly consumer prices would rise as cheap imports disappear from shelves. The economic pain would be widespread and severe. The current tariff increases targeting Mexico, Canada, and China are following a playbook that economists have been warning against for decades. While the stated goal is protecting American jobs and industries, history shows the net effect is typically negative. Protected industries may gain, but consumers and industries that rely on imports suffer disproportionately. When tariffs reach a certain threshold, they stop being just another economic policy and become a threat to economic stability itself. Smoot-Hawley crossed that threshold in 1930, and economists are concerned today's escalating tariffs could approach a similar danger zone if the cycle of retaliation continues. What makes tariffs particularly dangerous is how they can create a false sense of security at first. Protected industries may see short-term benefits, creating the illusion that the policy is working. But as international trade collapses and retaliatory measures take effect, the broader economic damage becomes impossible to ignore. This is why economists across the political spectrum consistently warn against aggressive tariff policies. It's not about political ideology. It's about the clear lessons of economic history. Tariffs that reach Smoot-Hawley levels don't strengthen economies, they strangle them. The story of Smoot-Hawley isn't just historical trivia. It's one of the most important economic lessons America ever learned. And it's a lesson we risk forgetting at our peril. When political leaders talk about using tariffs as leverage or protection, they're playing with the same economic fire that burned so many Americans in the 1930s. Some economists argue that today's global institutions like the World Trade Organization provide guardrails that weren't present in 1930, making a repeat of Smoot-Hawley's worst effects less likely. But these same experts warn that if tariffs continue to escalate and these institutions are weakened, the protective guardrails could fail. So how close are we to repeating history's mistakes? While current tariff levels haven't reached Smoot-Hawley territory, they've already risen to their highest point since the 1940s. More concerning is the trajectory, the rapid escalation and retaliatory cycle that mirrors the beginning stages of past trade wars. From farm to table, the hidden tariff tax in your grocery cart. The economic danger isn't just theoretical anymore. It's sitting right in your shopping cart. Next time you grab those surprisingly expensive tomatoes or wonder why your guacamole costs more than ever, you're experiencing firsthand what happens when tariffs transform from abstract policy into real-world price tags that affect every meal you make. What makes your grocery bill so vulnerable to these trade taxes? It's the massive integration of North American agriculture that's developed over decades. We've built an interconnected food system where produce flows freely across borders. Until now. Those invisible border taxes are suddenly making themselves very visible in your weekly shopping expenses. The numbers are staggering. Mexico isn't just sending us a few specialty items. It's the lifeline of American produce sections, supplying over 60% of all fresh vegetables Americans consume. Nearly half of all the fruit and nuts on our tables come from south of the border. That dependency means when tariffs hit Mexican imports, they hit your food budget immediately. Take avocados, that staple of toast, salads, and Super Bowl parties. A whopping 90% of avocados in American stores cross the border from Mexico. When a 25% tariff gets slapped on those imports, there's nowhere for retailers to hide the cost increase. Those avocados that used to cost $1.50 each are suddenly $1.85 or more. A price hike that adds up quickly for avocado lovers. But it's not just your guacamole that's getting more expensive. Let's talk tomatoes, the foundation of countless American meals from pasta sauce to sandwiches. Those vine-ripened clusters from Mexico now cost significantly more thanks to the same 25% tariff. Bell peppers, raspberries, and strawberries are all facing similar price increases. Research shows these aren't small bumps either. Overall fresh produce prices could rise by nearly 3% just from these tariffs, with some staple items like rice jumping over 4%. That might not sound catastrophic until you realize it's happening across your entire grocery cart, week after week, month after month. The timing couldn't be worse for consumers already struggling with inflation. While overall inflation has cooled somewhat, food prices remain stubbornly high. These tariffs are essentially pouring gasoline on that fire, pushing prices even higher, just as many families hoped for relief. What makes this particularly tricky is the seasonal nature of our produce dependency. During winter months, American farms simply can't grow many of the vegetables we consume daily. Without heated greenhouses, which dramatically increase production costs, we rely almost entirely on Mexican farms for fresh tomatoes, peppers, and other produce during colder months. This creates a seasonal pricing nightmare. During summer, domestic production helps keep some prices in check. But winter vegetables become luxury items when tariffs hit Mexican imports during the months we're most dependent on them. Those $2 bell peppers in July might cost $4 or more in January when tariffs get added to winter imports. There's another sneaky way tariffs raise your grocery bill that most people never notice. The pricing behavior of domestic producers. When imported goods become more expensive due to tariffs, American farmers don't rush to undercut those prices. They raise their own prices to match the new market ceiling. It's basic economics. When competition from imports decreases because tariffs make them more expensive, domestic producers gain pricing power. They can charge more for their products while still appearing competitive compared to the newly expensive imports. This means even buying local doesn't necessarily help you avoid tariff-driven price increases. The research backs this up. When tariffs were placed on solar panels, studies found that a $1 increase in tariffs increased the final price of an installed solar panel system by $1.34. Manufacturers didn't just pass along the exact tariff cost, they added even more on top of it. The same pattern happens with food prices when agricultural tariffs create market distortions. This overshifting of costs isn't some rare exception. It's standard practice across many industries affected by tariffs. Economists call it tariff pass-through, and the rate often exceeds 100%, meaning consumers pay more than the actual tariff amount as it works through the supply chain. For your grocery budget, this creates a double whammy. Not only do imported foods cost more due to tariffs, but domestic alternatives also increase in price due to reduced competition. There's virtually no escape from these higher costs unless you grow all your own food. The actual price increases are already happening. Take a look at your receipt the next time you shop. That $5.99 package of raspberries from Mexico that was $4.79 last year? The difference isn't just inflation, it's largely the hidden tariff tax you're paying. The same goes for the avocados that jumped from $1.50 to $1.85 each, or the tomatoes that seem inexplicably pricier than they were a few months ago. For a typical family of 4, these price increases add up to hundreds of dollars annually in additional grocery costs. A A household that regularly consumes Mexican produce might see their annual grocery bill increase by $300 to $500 just from these tariff effects. Money that could otherwise go towards savings, education, or other necessities. What's particularly concerning for consumers is how these price increases arrive with little transparency. Your grocery store doesn't put a helpful tariff surcharge line on your receipt. There's no warning label explaining why that package of bell peppers costs 25% more than it did last year. The price increases simply appear, leaving consumers confused about why their grocery budgets suddenly don't stretch as far. This lack of transparency makes it nearly impossible for consumers to make informed choices. How can you budget effectively when prices increase unpredictably due to policy decisions made in Washington? How can you comparison shop when both imported and domestic options increase in price simultaneously? The timing of these price increases can also be confusing. There's often a lag between when tariffs are announced and when prices actually increase at retail. This happens because retailers may have inventory purchased before the tariffs took effect, or they might temporarily absorb costs to avoid shocking customers with sudden price jumps. But make no mistake, those costs eventually reach consumers. Retailers and producers simply can't afford to absorb 25% tariffs indefinitely. Even if prices don't jump immediately, they creep up over time until the full cost is passed to shoppers. For budget-conscious consumers, this creates a planning nightmare. The produce items you regularly purchase might seem affordable one week, then jump significantly in price the next. Your carefully planned grocery budget suddenly doesn't stretch as far. The regressive reality, why lower incomes pay more. Those difficult grocery choices become impossible decisions when you're already living paycheck to paycheck. What most politicians won't tell you about tariffs is that they function as a Robin Hood system in reverse, taking a much bigger bite from those who can least afford it, with lower-income families losing 2.5% of their income while the wealthy sacrifice just 0.9%. Let's talk about something economists call regressive taxation, a fancy term with a simple meaning: taxes that hit poor people harder than rich people. Income taxes are generally progressive. The more you make, the higher percentage you pay. But tariffs, they're the opposite, and that's where the unfairness begins. When prices rise because of tariffs, everyone pays the same dollar amount increase at the checkout counter. That $1.50 jump in avocado prices? It costs the same whether you make $30,000 or $300,000 a year. But here's the critical difference. That $1.50 represents a much larger portion of a lower-income family's budget. The Tax Foundation's analysis reveals a shocking reality. Tariffs are consuming nearly 3 times more of lower-income households' budgets compared to wealthy households. The numbers tell the painful story. Households in the second lowest income bracket lose about 2.5% of their income to these hidden taxes, while those in the top income bracket sacrifice just 0.9%. Why such a dramatic difference? It comes down to what economists call budget share, the percentage of your income that goes toward different types of purchases. Lower-income families spend a much higher percentage of their money on exactly the kinds of basic necessities that tariffs target: food, clothing, and household essentials. Think about it. If you're making $35,000 a year, you might spend 15% of your income on groceries. But if you're making $200,000, your grocery spending might only represent 3% of your income. When tariffs drive up food prices, the impact is 5 times greater for the lower-income household as a percentage of their overall budget. The math gets even worse when you consider the entire household budget. Lower-income families typically spend 80 to 90% of their income on essentials: housing, transportation, food, healthcare, and basic household items. Many of these categories are directly affected by tariffs, whether it's the Chinese-made microwave, the Mexican-grown tomatoes, or the Canadian lumber used to build affordable housing. Meanwhile, higher-income households have much more discretionary spending and invest a greater percentage of their income in services or assets that aren't directly impacted by these trade taxes. Their essential spending might represent only 30 to 40% of their total income, creating a natural buffer against tariff impacts. But the inequality doesn't stop there. Wealthier households have far more flexibility in how they respond to price increases. When tariffs drive up the cost of certain products, households with more disposable income can 1. Easily substitute with higher quality domestic alternatives. 2. Postpone non-urgent purchases until prices stabilize. 3. Absorb the higher costs without changing their lifestyle. 4. Buy in bulk when prices are lower to avoid future increases. 5. Shop at specialty retailers that might absorb some tariff costs to maintain customer loyalty. For families living paycheck to paycheck, these options simply don't exist. When you're stretching every dollar, you can't afford to stock up during sales or switch to more expensive alternatives. You're buying what you can afford right now, even if the price just jumped because of a tariff. The dollar impact tells an equally troubling story. Households in the second lowest income decile lose approximately $1,100 annually to tariffs. Money that could cover several months of utility bills or desperately needed car repairs. Middle-income households face an even larger dollar amount at around $1,800, though it represents a smaller percentage of their total income. What makes this situation particularly unfair is that these regressive effects are largely hidden from public view. When politicians announce tariffs, they rarely mention that they're effectively implementing a tax system that places the heaviest burden on those least able to bear it. And unlike income taxes, which are clearly visible on your paycheck, tariff costs are buried in the price tags of everyday items. There's no line on your grocery receipt that says tariff surcharge, just higher prices that stretch already thin budgets to the breaking point. For families in the lowest income brackets, these hidden taxes create impossible choices. Do you buy less food this week? Skip a medication refill? Delay paying the electric bill? Put off needed repairs? Each price increase narrows the already slim margin between getting by and falling behind. The cruel irony is that the same tariff policies often promoted as protecting American jobs and industries are simultaneously creating a significant financial burden for the working-class families they claim to help. The steel worker whose job might be protected by metal tariffs is simultaneously paying higher prices for everyday goods affected by those same trade policies. Looking at the complete economic picture, the regressive nature of tariffs becomes even more apparent when we consider economic mobility. For families trying to build savings and escape the cycle of paycheck-to-paycheck living, every extra dollar siphoned away by higher prices represents a setback to their financial progress. Even modest price increases can have cascading effects. When grocery prices jump, families might cut back on healthier, more expensive foods, potentially leading to health issues that create additional financial strain. When household goods cost more, needed replacements might be delayed, creating further problems down the road. For middle-class households, tariff costs might mean reduced savings or scaled-back vacation plans. But for families already struggling to make ends meet, these same costs can mean genuine hardship, falling behind on bills, taking on high-interest debt, or making painful cuts to already bare-bones budgets. The numbers paint a clear picture. Tariffs represent one of the most regressive forms of taxation in our economic system, placing a disproportionate burden on those with the least ability to absorb it. While a wealthy household might barely notice the impact, a family living on the financial edge feels every penny of these hidden taxes. Sticker shock: how tariffs are driving up big-ticket prices. If those penny increases on everyday items are just the beginning of the tariff story, the real shock comes when you look at the biggest purchases in your life. While a 25% tariff might add a few dollars to your grocery bill, the same percentage on a new car or home renovation could add thousands to your costs overnight. These hidden taxes aren't just nibbling at your budget. They're taking massive bites out of your biggest financial milestones. The North American automotive industry operates like a perfectly choreographed dance, with parts crossing borders between the US, Canada, and Mexico multiple times during production. Nearly half of all US vehicle and parts imports come from our northern and southern neighbors, creating a deeply interconnected manufacturing ecosystem. This integration has historically kept prices lower, but now poses a massive vulnerability to consumers as new tariffs take effect. When a 25% tariff hits vehicles and parts from Canada and Mexico, the math becomes painful for American car buyers. Industry analysts project these tariffs will add approximately $2,700 to $3,000 to the sticker price of the average new vehicle. That's enough to completely destroy many families' carefully planned car budgets or force them into longer, more expensive financing terms. What makes this situation even more frustrating is that these price increases hit virtually all vehicles sold in America. not just those manufactured in Canada or Mexico. Even American-made cars contain substantial components from across our borders. In fact, about 74% of the foreign value added in vehicles imported from Mexico is actually American-made content that crossed the border for assembly. This means the parts may cross borders multiple times during production, potentially facing tariffs at each crossing. Imagine this scenario. An American-made engine component ships to Mexico for integration into a larger assembly, then returns to the US for installation in a made-in-America vehicle. That single part could face multiple tariff charges along its journey, with each cost increase ultimately landing in the final sticker price. It's a compounding effect that magnifies well beyond the headline 25% figure. For many families, the timing couldn't be worse. With average new car prices already hovering around $48,000 before these tariffs, the additional $3,000 will push monthly payments even higher at a time when interest rates remain elevated. A family that had budgeted for a $500 monthly car payment might suddenly face $550 or more for the exact same vehicle. But the automotive industry isn't the only sector where tariffs are causing major financial pain. If you're thinking about buying a new home or renovating your current one, prepare for an even bigger sticker shock. The construction industry relies heavily on Canadian softwood lumber, which accounts for approximately 70% of all U.S. lumber imports. This essential building material was already subject to duties of around 14.5%, but now faces an additional 25% tariff, effectively bringing the total to nearly 40%. The National Association of Home Builders has run the numbers, and they're alarming. These new tariffs could increase builder costs by $7,500 to $10,000 per new home. But that's just the conservative estimate. When you factor in the total impact across all construction materials, experts project that tariffs could add between $17,000 and $22,000 to the cost of new homes. For perspective, a $20,000 increase on a 30-year mortgage at current interest rates translates to roughly $130 more in monthly payments. Over the life of the loan, that's nearly $47,000 in additional costs, all triggered by tariff policies that most homebuyers don't even realize exist. The housing market impact extends beyond just the purchase price. Research indicates that for every $1,000 increase in home prices, approximately 106,000 potential buyers are priced out of the market entirely. Apply that math to a $20,000 tariff-driven increase, and over 2 million American families could potentially lose their shot at homeownership. Young families saving for their first home face a particularly cruel math problem. Just as they approach their down payment goal, the target suddenly moves thousands of dollars further away. A family that had saved $25,000 for a 10% down payment on a $250,000 starter home now finds that same property priced at $270,000, requiring an additional $2,000 in down payment plus higher monthly payments. Beyond cars and homes, other big-ticket purchases are feeling the tariff pinch too. Appliances and furniture often rely on imported components that are now subject to higher duties. A new refrigerator, washer/dryer set, or living room furniture package could easily cost 10 to 15% more due to these hidden taxes. The ripple effects continue through home renovation projects as well. That kitchen remodel you've been planning? The cabinets, countertops, fixtures, and appliances are all vulnerable to tariff-induced price increases. A $30,000 kitchen renovation could easily balloon to $35,000 or more as suppliers pass these costs along. These aren't theoretical concerns. Consumer sentiment surveys show that 76% of shoppers are already anticipating making changes to their purchasing habits in response to tariff-related price increases. Many are considering delaying major purchases altogether, which could eventually trigger a broader economic slowdown if enough consumers pull back simultaneously. The timing of these purchases becomes increasingly crucial for consumer financial planning. Buying just before or just after tariff implementation can mean thousands of dollars in savings or additional costs. But most consumers don't track international trade policy closely enough to time these decisions effectively, leaving them vulnerable to sudden price increases. For middle-class families, these tariff-induced price hikes on major purchases create a cascading effect on financial goals. The extra $3,000 on a car purchase might mean delaying home renovations. The additional $20,000 on a new home could mean postponing retirement savings contributions. Each tariff-driven price increase forces difficult trade-offs that can derail carefully constructed financial plans. What makes this situation particularly challenging is that unlike income taxes, which are clearly visible in paychecks, or sales taxes, which appear on receipts, tariff costs remain hidden within product prices. Consumers never see a line item that says added tariff cost, $3,000 on their car purchase agreement or mortgage documents. The combination of these major purchase price increases represents a significant wealth transfer from American consumers to the government. Unlike traditional taxation, which at least funds public services, these tariff revenues often end up being redirected to subsidize industries hurt by retaliatory tariffs from other countries, creating a circular and inefficient economic system. Digital disruption, electronics, and the China tariff effect. That circular economic system gets even more complicated when we look at our technology purchases. Think your iPhone is expensive now. The hidden tax on electronics is about to make your next upgrade cost hundreds more. And there's almost no escape since 90% of our tech devices contain Chinese components. When you pull out your smartphone to check social media or fire up your gaming console for a weekend session, you're probably not thinking about international trade policies. But that sleek device in your pocket or entertainment center is about to become ground zero in the escalating tariff battle with China. Unlike previous trade policies that carefully exempted consumer electronics like Apple products, the new wave of tariffs takes direct aim at our digital lives. That $1,000 iPhone barrier that seemed shocking just a few years ago, it's about to look like a bargain basement deal as these devices face substantial price hikes. Let's talk real numbers. Gaming enthusiasts are in for serious sticker shock as console prices could jump from $617 to $863. A price leap that will make many gamers think twice before upgrading to next-gen systems. And it's not just gaming that's affected. Virtually everything with a chip or screen is caught in this tariff net. We expect our vendors will pass along costs to us, and we, in turn, will pass along those costs, explained Best Buy's CEO in a recent statement that confirms what many retail analysts already suspected. These costs aren't disappearing into corporate profit margins, they're headed straight to your wallet. The 10% tariff on Chinese imports doesn't sound catastrophic until you understand how supply chains work. That 10% often cascades through the production process, potentially resulting in 10 to 20% increases on final product prices for smartphones and laptops. A $1,200 MacBook could easily become a $1,400 plus purchase, while flagship smartphones creep further into luxury good territory. What makes electronics particularly vulnerable to these tariffs is the deep integration of Chinese manufacturing in the global tech supply chain. Even products proudly stamped, made in USA, often contain dozens of Chinese-manufactured components that can't be quickly sourced elsewhere. Tech companies face a brutal reality. They can't simply flip a switch and move production out of China. The intricate network of suppliers, specialized manufacturing capabilities, and trained workforce that China has developed over decades can't be replicated in other countries overnight, or even over several years. When Apple executives look at alternatives to Chinese manufacturing, they find facilities that can handle some aspects of production but lack the scale, speed, and expertise needed for their complex devices. Vietnam and India are slowly developing these capabilities, but they're still years away from matching China's technological ecosystem. This manufacturing reality creates a perfect storm for consumers. Tech companies can't easily escape the tariffs. They'll pass most costs to consumers, and there are few alternative products not affected by the same price increases. And here's where it gets personal for your budget. The average household is projected to face an increase of $830 to $2,000 annually in technology spending. Think about your own tech purchases over the last year: smartphones, laptops, TVs, gaming systems, smart home devices, wearables, and now imagine paying 15 to 25% more for each of them. For a family of 4 with multiple devices per person, this quickly adds up. Parents already struggling with the annual tech tax of upgrading devices for school and work now face even steeper costs. That replacement laptop for college or work-from-home setup just jumped several $100s. Even if you're not planning major electronics purchases soon, These tariffs will affect your household through 1,000 paper cuts. The new router you need when yours dies suddenly costs $80 instead of $60. Replacing a broken tablet for your kids jumps from $250 to $300. Even everyday items like wireless earbuds see their prices creep up by $20 to $30. What makes electronics different from other tariff-affected categories is how deeply integrated they've become in modern life. While we could potentially delay a car purchase or home renovation, many electronics purchases aren't optional in today's digital world. When your work laptop fails or your smartphone breaks, waiting isn't usually an option. Previous data on tariffs shows a near-complete pass-through to import prices, meaning almost all of these increased costs will land directly on consumers. Unlike some industries where companies might absorb part of the tariff cost, the thin margins in consumer electronics leave little room for companies to shield customers. The timing couldn't be worse for consumers. With technology becoming increasingly essential for education, work, and daily life, these price increases function as a regressive tax on digital participation. Families already struggling with inflation now face significantly higher costs to maintain their technological infrastructure. Even budget-conscious shoppers face limited options for avoiding these price increases. The buy last year's model strategy that savvy consumers have long used to save on electronics becomes less effective when even older models see price increases due to component tariffs. The tech industry itself is sounding alarm bells about these impending price hikes. Retail analysts expect the full impact to hit consumers over the next 6 to 12 months as companies work through existing inventory and begin importing goods under the new tariff regime. For perspective, consider what these increases mean for your annual technology budget. If your household typically spends $2,000 annually on technology purchases and repairs, you could soon be looking at $2,300 to $2,500 for the same items. That $300 to $500 increase represents real money that could have gone towards savings, debt reduction, or other essential expenses. What makes this situation particularly frustrating for consumers is the lack of alternatives. When tariffs hit food products, consumers can sometimes substitute domestic options. But with electronics, where global supply chains and Chinese manufacturing dominance are deeply entrenched, substitution options are extremely limited. The cascading effect continues beyond just the devices themselves. Accessories, replacement parts, and repair services will all see price increases as the components they use become more expensive. Even cloud services and subscription prices may eventually reflect these macro myth. Do tariffs actually help the economy? While tech companies scramble to adjust their pricing models, there's a bigger story playing out in the American economy. Have you ever wondered why politicians keep promising tariffs will create jobs when almost every economist, from far left to far right, warns they'll actually shrink our economy by billions? The math behind this contradiction might shock you. Let's get real about the economics of tariffs. On one side, we hear politicians claiming these trade policies will bring manufacturing jobs back to America and revitalize struggling industries. On the other side, economic researchers are waving red flags about potential damage to the broader economy. Who's right? The answer lies in understanding what economists call the seen versus unseen principle. The seen effects of tariffs are easy to spot. A steel mill stays open, workers keep their jobs, and politicians can point to specific factories saved by their policies. These victories make for great campaign ads and compelling news stories. But what about the unseen costs? This is where the economic picture gets much more complicated and concerning. According to research from the Tax Foundation, Trump's first-term tariffs resulted in a net loss to the U.S. economy of $16 billion annually. That's not a small number. We're talking about over $114 billion in total losses to firms and consumers. These aren't just abstract figures on an economist's spreadsheet. They represent real money coming out of real Americans' pockets. The job picture is equally troubling. While tariffs may protect jobs in specific industries, they simultaneously put many more jobs at risk in industries that rely on those protected materials. The steel industry offers a perfect example of this imbalance. For every job in steel production that tariffs protect, approximately 80 jobs in steel-consuming industries are placed at risk. Think about that ratio. 1 job saved, 80 jobs endangered. Why does this happen? When steel prices rise due to tariffs, every industry that uses steel, from auto manufacturing to construction, faces higher costs. These companies then have three options: absorb the costs, reducing profits and potential growth; pass costs to consumers, reducing demand; or cut expenses elsewhere, often through layoffs or reduced hiring. None of these outcomes create more American jobs. In fact, they typically result in fewer. The Congressional Budget Office has projected that tariffs will lead to significant price hikes on consumer goods. These increases don't affect everyone equally. They hit lower-income households the hardest. When prices rise on everyday necessities, families with tight budgets feel the squeeze most intensely. But it gets worse. The Federal Reserve has indicated that higher tariffs could fuel inflation beyond just the directly affected products. This ripple effect would further dampen consumer spending and economic growth as Americans find their purchasing power eroded across the board. What's particularly fascinating is how the economic impact of tariffs creates a political paradox. The benefits are concentrated and visible. Specific factories stay open, particular workers keep their jobs. Meanwhile, the costs are diffuse and largely invisible. Slightly higher prices on thousands of products, jobs that were never created, business expansions that never happened. This asymmetry makes tariffs politically attractive despite their overall economic harm. We can see this principle clearly in recent U.S. economic history. The Peterson Institute for International Economics has analyzed the tariffs from Trump's first term and found they didn't provide significant economic help to regions with newly protected sectors. Meanwhile, foreign retaliation had clear negative employment impacts, particularly hammering American agriculture. Farmers ended up needing $28 billion in emergency bailouts just to stay afloat. Hardly a sign of successful economic policy. How big is the potential impact of currently proposed tariffs? According to economic models, they could shrink U.S. GDP by 0.4 to 0.6% in 2025 alone. That translates to roughly $80 to $110 billion in economic activity vanishing from the American economy. For perspective, that's roughly equivalent to the entire economic output of a state like New Mexico or Maine simply disappearing. On a personal level, the Tax Policy Center estimates these tariffs would lower the average after-tax incomes of U.S. households by about $1,800, or 1.8%, in 2025. That's money that won't be spent at local businesses, invested for retirement, or used for education. All activities that actually do create sustainable economic growth. The manufacturing sector, supposedly the primary beneficiary of tariff protection, has historically shown net job losses following tariff implementation. While specific protected industries might add some positions, the downstream industries that rely on their products shed far more jobs due to increased costs. It's like protecting one factory at the expense of dozens of others. Consider the furniture industry. When tariffs raised the price of imported steel and aluminum, American furniture manufacturers faced significantly higher costs for the metal components in their products. These companies couldn't simply absorb these new expenses. They had to raise prices, reduce production, or cut jobs. The result? Despite the tariff's stated goal of protecting American manufacturing, they actually accelerated job losses in parts of the manufacturing sector. Economists refer to this as the cascading effect of tariffs. The initial tariff on raw materials increases costs for intermediate producers, who then raise prices for final goods manufacturers, who ultimately pass those costs to consumers. At each step, economic activity contracts slightly as higher prices reduce demand. Historical evidence consistently shows that tariffs raise prices and reduce available quantities of goods and services for American businesses and consumers. This leads to lower incomes and reduced employment opportunities nationwide, precisely the opposite of what tariff proponents claim. Why then do tariffs remain politically popular? The answer lies in their visibility. When a steel plant stays open thanks to tariff protection, local news covers the story. Workers kept their jobs. Community leaders praise the policy. But when thousands of other companies each cut a position or two because of higher costs, or when hundreds of thousands of Americans pay slightly more for everyday products, there's no dramatic story to tell. The economic damage happens in small increments across countless households and businesses. This is why economists across the political spectrum, from progressive to conservative, generally agree that tariffs create more economic harm than benefit. Their opposition isn't based on political ideology, but on centuries of economic data and analysis showing that restricting trade through tariffs typically reduces overall prosperity. The retaliation effect, when trade wars escalate. When economists from all political persuasions agree tariffs harm our economy, why do trading partners respond with even more harmful tariffs of their own? The answer reveals a dangerous domino effect that could turn your $1,200 annual tariff cost into a staggering $2,000 plus burden overnight. It's basic human nature. If someone punches you, you punch back. International trade follows the same principle. Our trading partners aren't just passively accepting America's tariff increases. They're strategically designing countermeasures to inflict maximum political and economic pain. Canada's response has been swift and calculated. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau didn't hesitate to announce a matching 25% levy on $107 billion worth of American goods. Meanwhile, Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum has promised similar retaliation, though the full scope remains under wraps. But make no mistake, these aren't random responses. They're precision strikes aimed at America's economic pressure points. China's counterattack demonstrates how sophisticated these retaliatory measures can be. They've imposed 15% tariffs, specifically on American coal and liquefied natural gas, targeting our energy sector. They've added another 10% tariff on agricultural machinery and vehicles. But China hasn't stopped at tariffs. They've opened antitrust investigations into U.S. companies, creating regulatory uncertainty that can be just as damaging as direct taxes. What makes these retaliatory tariffs particularly dangerous is their surgical precision. Canada and Mexico aren't just targeting random American exports. They're specifically going after products from politically sensitive regions. Think agricultural products from swing states where elections are often decided by razor-thin margins. It's economic warfare with political consequences baked in. Let's make this concrete. When previous trade disputes erupted in 2018 to 2019, retaliatory tariffs devastated American farmers. The damage was so severe that the government had to step in with $28 billion in emergency bailouts just to keep farms afloat. That's billions in taxpayer money spent not to improve agriculture, but simply to offset the damage from trade retaliation. Imagine you're a soybean farmer in Iowa or a dairy producer in Wisconsin. You've spent decades building relationships with international buyers, establishing quality standards, and creating reliable supply chains. Then suddenly, your products face punishing tariffs in your biggest export markets. Your foreign customers don't wait around. They quickly find alternative suppliers in Brazil, Australia, or Europe. Those relationships you spent years building, gone overnight. Even if tariffs eventually disappear, regaining those lost markets can take years. Meanwhile, your operation struggles with reduced income, potential layoffs, and possibly even bankruptcy. This isn't hypothetical. It's exactly what happened to thousands of American agricultural operations during previous trade disputes. But the pain doesn't stop at the farm gate. Those agricultural losses ripple through rural communities, affecting equipment dealers, seed suppliers, processing facilities, and transportation companies. A town that depends on agricultural exports suddenly sees its economic foundation cracking. What's particularly concerning about the current situation is how economic models project the damage. Initial U.S. tariffs could reduce our GDP by 0.4 to 0.6%. But when you factor in retaliatory measures, that damage potentially doubles to a total GDP reduction of 0.7 to 1%. In plain English, that means instead of our economy growing, we could see it shrink by up to 1%, representing hundreds of billions in lost economic activity. For the average household, this translates to an even heavier burden. The Tax Foundation already estimates that tariffs could cost the average family about $1,200 annually. But when you add the impact of retaliatory measures, that figure could easily balloon past $2,000 per household. That's not just a theoretical economic concept. It's real money coming out of your pocket through higher prices and potentially lost jobs. Think about what $2,000 means to the average family. That's several months of grocery bills, a year of car payments, or a significant chunk of college tuition. It's the difference between building savings and falling into debt for many households. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, hardly a radical organization, has been sounding the alarm. They've urgently called for reconsideration of the new tariffs, warning that these policies will force American businesses into an impossible choice: raise prices on consumers or risk bankruptcy. Either way, it's American families who ultimately pay the price. What makes retaliation particularly damaging is its targeting of export-dependent industries that often employ thousands of American workers. When China slaps tariffs on agricultural machinery, that directly impacts manufacturing jobs in places like Illinois, Iowa, and Wisconsin. When Canada targets American goods, that affects workers across the northern border states. We're already seeing the early warning signs of this cycle repeating. The initial $1,200 household cost estimate only accounts for the first-round effects of American tariffs. It doesn't capture the price increases, job losses, and market disruptions that come when trading partners retaliate. Those secondary effects often prove more damaging than the initial tariffs. Consider the stark reality from recent history. When American tariffs triggered retaliation in 2018 to 2019, many affected industries saw export declines of 30 to 50%. Certain agricultural sectors were virtually wiped out in specific foreign markets. The government had to intervene with emergency aid packages that ultimately cost taxpayers billions. The cruel irony is that the industries most vulnerable to retaliation are often not the same ones protected by our initial tariffs. Steel and aluminum producers might benefit from import tariffs, but farmers and technology companies bear the brunt of the retaliation. The economic benefits are concentrated, while the pain is widely distributed. This creates a situation where the overall economic damage far outweighs any potential benefits. Protection for a few thousand jobs in one sector can lead to tens of thousands of job losses across multiple other industries. The math simply doesn't add up to a net positive. What should particularly concern you as a consumer is how these retaliatory measures compound the price increases you're already facing. That avocado that's already more expensive due to U.S. tariffs? Now the American farmer who might have provided an alternative faces barriers selling other crops internationally, reducing their income and potentially forcing them to raise prices on whatever they sell domestically. The retail response: how stores hide tariff costs. Those higher prices at the grocery store aren't just coming from international tariffs. They're hiding in plain sight through retail sleight of hand. Ever noticed your favorite cereal box getting suspiciously lighter while the price stays the same? That's no coincidence. Retailers have mastered the art of disguising tariff costs through tactics so subtle you probably haven't even noticed them emptying your wallet. When Target CEO Brian Cornell recently made headlines, he wasn't announcing a new sale. He was admitting what industry insiders have known all along. Cornell confirmed that consumers can expect higher prices on fruits and vegetables almost immediately due to the Mexico tariffs. But this candid admission only scratches the surface of how retailers are passing these costs on to you. The playbook retailers use to handle tariff costs is far more sophisticated than simply slapping on higher price tags. Think of it as a three-part strategy designed to minimize customer backlash while maximizing profit margins. First, there's the obvious approach: immediate price increases on products directly affected by tariffs. This typically happens with seasonal items or products where consumers might expect price volatility anyway. But the second strategy is where things get sneaky: shrinkflation. Rather than raising the price, manufacturers and retailers simply reduce the amount of product while keeping the same packaging and price point. That ice cream that was once a true half-gallon is now 1.5 quarts. The potato chip bag that looks the same size now contains fewer chips. The chocolate bar with slightly thinner squares. Each change seems minor, but they all add up to you paying more for less. The third approach is perhaps the most insidious: gradual price creep. Instead of shocking customers with a sudden 25% price hike that might drive them to competitors, retailers implement a series of smaller increases over 6 to 12 months. A 4% increase here, another 5% there. By the time the full tariff cost has been passed to you, you've already adjusted to the new normal pricing. What's particularly interesting is the timing. A comprehensive look at previous tariff implementations reveals that many price increases don't hit immediately. Instead, they appear 6 to 12 months after tariffs are announced as retailers deplete their pre-tariff inventory buffers. This creates a dangerous illusion that tariffs aren't affecting prices, when in reality, the increases are simply waiting in the wings. Retailers like Walmart have openly acknowledged they won't be immune to tariff impacts. Translation: they'll be adjusting their prices accordingly. The company line from most major retailers follows a similar pattern. Initial assurances of minimal impact followed by gradual but substantial price increases as inventory turnover occurs. Think you can just avoid products from tariff countries? Think again. Even products without direct tariff exposure often see price increases. When imports become more expensive, domestic suppliers typically raise their prices to match the new market ceiling. It's basic supply and demand. If Mexican avocados suddenly cost 25% more, U.S. growers have room to increase their prices too, knowing consumers have fewer affordable alternatives. What's especially concerning is that research shows retailers eventually pass between 70 to 100% of tariff costs onto consumers. While they might absorb some costs initially, especially for competitive or high-profile products, the full burden ultimately lands in your shopping cart. The numbers from consumer sentiment research are equally revealing. A recent survey found that 83% of U.S. shoppers are aware of new or proposed tariffs, with 80% expressing concern about their financial impact. More telling is that 76% are already planning to change their shopping habits in response. When more than 3/4 of consumers are adjusting their behavior before prices even fully rise, you know the economic impact is real. Consumers are particularly worried about price increases in essential categories. 55% expressed concern about grocery prices, 41% about gasoline, and 34% about household goods. These aren't luxury items you can simply choose to skip. They're the fundamental purchases that make up the bulk of most household budgets. What makes the retail response to tariffs particularly effective is that it's nearly invisible to the average shopper. There's no tariff surcharge line on your receipt. No warning label that says this product used to contain 20% more. No alert that prices have gradually increased 25% over the past year due to trade policies. The costs are baked in, distributed across your entire shopping experience in ways designed to minimize your awareness. For retailers, this approach makes perfect business sense. Industry experts recommend that companies implement gradual price increases to minimize consumer pushback. They suggest running targeted promotions to retain price-sensitive shoppers while still passing on the bulk of tariff costs. This isn't conspiracy, it's standard retail strategy openly discussed in industry publications. Some retailers are exploring alternative sourcing strategies, shifting to domestic suppliers or non-tariff countries where possible. But these adjustments take time and often come with their own costs. Developing new supply chains isn't cheap, and those development costs? You guessed it, they eventually get passed to consumers too. What's particularly revealing is how differently retailers respond based on their customer demographics. Stores catering to higher-income shoppers tend to implement price increases more quickly and completely, knowing their customer base has more purchasing power. Discount retailers serving budget-conscious consumers may hold prices longer but compensate through more aggressive shrinkflation tactics. The grocery sector provides the clearest example of these strategies in action. When faced with tariffs on fresh produce from Mexico, retailers have three options: raise prices immediately, reduce package sizes, or substitute with domestic alternatives that are often more expensive or lower quality. In most cases, they employ all three tactics simultaneously, creating a triple whammy effect on your grocery budget. Even if you're a savvy shopper who checks price per ounce and compares products carefully, retailers are often one step ahead. The timing of special offers and temporary price reductions is frequently aligned with tariff implementation, creating the illusion of savings when prices are actually increasing. That 20% more free promotion might simply be returning the practical consumer shrinkflation size temporarily. Just as retailers have a strategic playbook for passing on tariff costs, smart consumers are developing their own counter-strategies. With 76% of shoppers already planning to change their shopping habits in response to these hidden taxes, it's clear the average American isn't taking these price hikes lying down. But while most people focus on simply cutting back, the most effective money-saving moves might surprise you. Let's be honest, you can't completely escape the tariff tsunami headed for your wallet. But with some strategic planning, you can significantly reduce its impact without dramatically changing your lifestyle. Think of it as playing economic defense in a game where the rules have suddenly changed. The first and possibly most powerful strategy is timing your purchases around tariff implementation dates. When the government announces new tariffs, there's typically a grace period before they take full effect. This creates a window of opportunity where retailers still have inventory purchased at pre-tariff prices. For example, if you're planning a major home renovation, tracking when those 25% tariffs on Canadian lumber will hit could save thousands. Experts recommend watching for announcements of tariff implementation, then making larger purchases 2 to 3 weeks before they take effect. When retailers are racing to clear inventory, they know will soon cost them more. This timing strategy works particularly well for seasonal produce. Since Mexico supplies so much of our fresh fruits and vegetables, understanding seasonal patterns can help you stock up before prices jump. Consider buying extra produce when it's in season locally, then freezing it for later use. A family that strategically purchases and freezes berries during peak summer months could avoid paying those 25% tariff-inflated prices during winter, potentially saving $10 to $15 per week on produce alone. The second strategy involves substituting domestic alternatives when possible. While 30% of consumers already plan to buy fewer imported goods in response to tariffs, being selective about which products you substitute can maximize savings. Not all domestic alternatives will save you money. Sometimes the price gap between imported and domestic goods exists for legitimate cost reasons. However, in categories where tariffs have recently been applied, domestic alternatives suddenly become more competitive. For example, while Mexican avocados face steep tariffs, California avocados might become relatively more affordable despite their traditionally higher price point. Similarly, furniture made from American hardwoods might now compete more favorably with imported options. The key is identifying which product categories face the steepest tariff increases, currently automotive, electronics, produce, and metals, and focusing your substitution efforts there. A third effective strategy is postponing non-essential electronics upgrades. With China supplying so many components for our tech products, electronics are particularly vulnerable to price increases. Since technology typically gets better and cheaper over time anyway, extending the life of your current devices by 12 to 18 months could mean avoiding the peak tariff impact period altogether. When you do upgrade, consider last year's models, which often sell at significant discounts once newer versions are released. For example, delaying a family's smartphone upgrades by just 1 year could save hundreds of dollars in tariff-related price increases. The same principle applies to laptops, TVs, and gaming consoles, all of which face potential double-digit price increases due to tariffs on Chinese goods. Fourth, consider the secondary market for tariff-heavy items. Used goods aren't subject to new tariffs since they were already imported and taxed previously. This creates an interesting opportunity where second-hand items become relatively more valuable compared to new ones. According to market experts, buying used items or domestic alternatives could potentially reduce tariff costs by 30 to 50% on affected products. This strategy works particularly well for durable goods like furniture, tools, and even vehicles. A used car purchased from within the US won't carry the additional tariff burden that new imports face. Even better, many high-quality items depreciate quickly in price, but not in functionality, making this a smart financial move regardless of tariff considerations. The fifth strategy involves bulk buying essential items when prices are favorable. We're not talking about hoarding, but rather being strategic about when you stock up on non-perishable goods that you know you'll use eventually. For example, if you have the storage space, purchasing canned goods, paper products, or cleaning supplies in bulk before tariff-related price increases take effect can lock in lower prices for months. This approach requires careful tracking of price. Trends. Several consumer apps now monitor price histories for common products, allowing you to identify when costs are beginning to increase. Retailers typically pass between 70 to 100% of tariff costs to consumers, but this happens gradually over 6 to 12 months. By monitoring these trends, you can identify when price increases are accelerating and make your bulk purchases accordingly. Combining these strategies creates a powerful defense against rising prices. A family that times major purchases around tariff implementation, substitutes strategically, postpones electronics upgrades, considers used items, and bulk buys essentials could potentially offset 30 to 50% of the tariff impact on their household budget. On a $1,800 annual tariff cost for a middle-income family, that's a potential savings of $540 to $900 per year. Beyond these specific tactics, developing general price awareness is crucial. Since 37% of consumers report changing retailers and 23% switching brands to find lower prices, it's clear that shopping around pays off. Compare prices across different retailers, as some absorb tariff costs longer than others based on their inventory management and customer base. Discount retailers may hold prices steady longer, but use more aggressive shrinkflation tactics, while specialty stores may raise prices more quickly but maintain product quality. Don't forget to leverage technology in your tariff defense strategy. Price comparison apps, grocery savings tools, and cashback programs can help offset rising costs. Some financial apps now even feature tariff impact alerts, warning consumers when products in specific categories are likely to see price increases based on trade policy announcements. Also consider the timing of sales events relative to tariff implementation. Retailers often use special offers and temporary price reductions around tariff implementation dates, creating the illusion of savings when prices are actually increasing overall. That 20% off sale might simply be offsetting a 25% tariff increase that's about to hit. The most powerful aspect of these strategies is that they don't require dramatic lifestyle changes. You're not cutting out products you enjoy. You're simply being more strategic about when and how you purchase them. This approach acknowledges the reality that while tariffs function as a hidden tax, informed consumers have more power to minimize their impact than most realize. As we've seen throughout this video, the reality of tariffs isn't buried in economic textbooks. It's hitting your wallet right now. 8 in 10 Americans are worried about how these policies will affect their finances, and with good reason. The alarm bells from economic history are ringing loud and clear, with experts drawing uncomfortable parallels to periods like the Smoot-Hawley era that deepened America's economic struggles. While politicians debate the merits of these policies, consumer sentiment tells the real story. Your household budget is already feeling the squeeze, and it's likely to get worse if current tariff trends continue. Economic forecasts suggest we're looking at a potential GDP reduction of nearly 0.5%, with inflation rates climbing even higher. Remember, this isn't just about abstract economic theories. It's about the hidden tax that's silently draining your purchasing power every time you swipe your card. Understanding these impacts isn't political. It's practical financial self-defense in an increasingly complex economic landscape. The most powerful tool you have is awareness, and now you're equipped to make smarter financial decisions despite